Billy, thumbs up. We're all recording, which is good. Before we start, obviously, delighted to inform you that Henry has joined us. Some of you may or may not be aware that Henry had a bicycle accident and has been in hospital for some time. All we can say for this purpose is we wish him well and a speedy recovery. As a cyclist myself, and as a cyclist, I know Tom, you're a cyclist. Just a word to the wise: if you're ever going on a bike, please wear a helmet. So, bit of a safety announcement for the beginning of Playpen event today. But yeah, Henry, we wish you a speedy recovery. I'm absolutely delighted that you joined us. Perhaps you shouldn't be joining us, but I can imagine that hospital is, can be rather a strange place. So I really appreciate you joining. So today we have the wonderful Tom McPhail joining us to Part Deux. We are calling it Part Deux. For those of you who with Tom's previous session, we basically ran out of time because there was just so much to talk about. You've seen on the invite, there was a lot of things left to discuss. So we are recording. I will monitor the lobby. If you want to raise a question, ask a question of Tom, challenge Tom, agree with Tom, or wholeheartedly disagree with Tom, then please raise a hand. And I will now go on mute. But the first thing I think, Tom, now we can talk about is post Mansion House speech. So over to you on that.
Thank you, Steve. And to Steve's earlier point, so last time we massively overran and ran out of time, which was a reflection of my failure to really prepare and structure my notes in such a way as to deliver a nice, tight, concise hours session. The same is true this time round. I have no idea how long this is going to last for, or whether we're going to get through all the material in 20 minutes, or we're still going to be talking 2 hours from now. So all I would say is please just chip in, and if you've got any questions, comments, let's make this a conversation. I've got a few thoughts on various things going on at the moment, so I'm going to revisit briefly the state of politics. We talked last time round a bit about the kind of current political environment. I think it remains very relevant. Yes, we're going to talk about the Mansion House. Of course, last time we spoke, we hadn't had the Mansion House. We have now. Some interesting stuff in there. I'm going to talk a bit about consolidation, adequacy, which is the next big phase of the pensions review looming. I want to talk a bit about engagement, member engagement, and the big picture. So I think it's also worth just highlighting. I had a pretty busy time recently talking to trade bodies, various policy wonks, trustee bodies. I had a chat with a member of the Conservative shadow ministerial team recently. That was quite interesting. And I've been to a couple of PPI events, one on the pensions framework, which I would encourage everyone to have a look at. It's a brilliant piece of work. And they also did an event not long ago on CDC pension schemes, which was interesting for me. And again, we might come on to that. So I've also been talking to a couple of asset managers recently. So I'm trying to get a good broad range of input into what on earth is going on at the moment. So I just wanted to start. I did not have Louise Haigh on my bingo card for first cabinet resignation of this government. I sincerely and deeply wish it had been Ed Miliband, but it wasn't. So she's now been replaced by Heidi Alexander, and I think it's interesting how quickly she was ejected, and I think that's. I mean, maybe it was her decision. We don't know, but I suspect to a degree it was Keir Starmer's decision to rip the plaster off and get it done and move on quickly. And I think the government's messaging has got infinitely better than it was in the early days post Sue Gray. It's much, much better now. They've taken control of the comms grid, but they're still really struggling. I was listening to Jack and Sam's podcast this morning, and they were making the point that we are still talking about the budget fallout weeks after the budget. That is not what Rachel Reeves would have wanted. And they've still struggled to get some of their messaging to stick. And I'd just make the observation as well that everything remains extremely volatile. And I think for this Parliament, more than any that I can remember, the four-way tension between Labour, the Liberal Democrats, Reform, and the Conservatives, and the composition of those parties, the nature of the Labour victory, which was very broad but pretty shallow, a lot of constituencies with only pretty small majorities, makes this a uniquely unpredictable Parliament. And I think the sort of triangulation that's going on between the parties and how they navigate their messaging and their positioning is going to continue to throw up unexpected events and outcomes. We were going to talk last time around a bit about the opposition, and we didn't. So I just want to briefly touch on that. I think the simplistic in that question is, do they tack back towards the centre, towards the Liberal Democrats? Do the Conservatives go back towards the middle? Or do they tack to the right towards Reform? And I think the correct answer is neither of those things. I think the Conservatives really need to go away. And I think they are doing this and working out what their proposition is and recrafting their message to the electorate. I think they're taking the view. I know they're taking the view. They've got some time. Kemi Badenoch has notably been very reluctant to pin her colours to the mast on any particular policies, apart from one or two notable exceptions, such as the farmers. And she started to talk about immigration, but even there, she's being very cautious about not following Robert Jenrick's road down the ECHR route. So I think it will take time for their policy positions to emerge. They're going to come under increasing pressure to come up with some policy positions. And in the meantime, Nigel Farage continues to make hay on the right, and rumours of Elon Musk throwing him large sums of money will have made a lot of people quite nervous, I think. There are, I think, around 130 Conservative MPs. That's not a lot. That's not a very deep talent pool from which to pick your shadow cabinet. I think they've got some interesting people there, people like Mel Stride, Gareth Davis, and the shadow Treasury team. I think the job of being the opposition is quite hard right now. And so just thinking about the PMQs I've watched, Kemi Badenoch is doing okay, but not really sort of knocking them out of the park yet. She needs to get better at it. I think she can get better at it. And Keir Starmer clearly finds being questioned by her an unpleasant experience, which is fun to watch. But I sincerely hope. I mean, watching Angela Rayner versus Alex Burkhardt was a lot more fun than watching Kemi Badenoch against Keir Starmer. But I think they both got to up their game a bit. Anyway, let's move on to the Mansion House. Look, the productive finance thing. I'm really. Oh, something coming up on the chat there. Wouldn't the government solve a lot of issues if they sorted out the home equity and retirement problem? Yes, Philip, they would. I think the government's I've been in conversation. We're going to go off on a tangent now. Look, you started something, Philip. I've been in conversation with the whole equity release sector. I chaired a conference on it back in the late summer on how the equity release sector can better integrate itself into the financial questions that the government and individuals face. So how can we use that couple of £1 trillion of housing equity wealth and cascade that down through the generations more effectively? How can that serve the government's economic agenda? How can it serve individuals' spending plans and requirements? There's a lot of unfinished business there. The equity release sector as a whole is kind of licking its wounds a bit at the moment. It's collapsed post the increase in interest rates. So turnover's gone down from around 6 billion to around 2 to 3 billion in the last couple of years. That's pretty uncomfortable. So they're all in slightly defensive mode at the moment. I would encourage the equity release sector to get on the front foot and actually start selling some messages about how they can be part of the solution rather than anything else, but they haven't quite got there yet. I'm happy to discuss that further, but otherwise I'm going to move on to the Mansion House. So productive finance, a couple of things on this. I think a lot of people in the industry, I continue to have conversations with a lot of people who are deeply queasy about the idea of the government in any way dictating or mandating where pension schemes should invest their capital. There are serious issues around fiduciary duty. What I think is interesting is, and I'm going to an event tomorrow with Emma Reynolds, we'll be speaking at. I wasn't at an event recently where she spoke, but it's been reported to me. A couple of things. One is she's pretty intemperate with the industry here. So when the industry says, "Well, we don't like the idea of mandation, and we'll decide where to invest our members' money," that gets short shrift from the government to take the view that, well, that's all very well, but you need to step up and put some more of that money into the UK economy and into economic growth. And if you don't do it willingly, we will make you do it. And the other point she made was that we have cross-party support on this, and I can report from conversations I've had with the opposition that they are also very sympathetic to the idea that it is legitimate for the government to lean on the pensions industry a bit and encourage that money into productive finance. So the industry may find the Overton window is not where it wants it to be. They may not have any friends if they try to fight this. I think the upshot is one way or another, it is going to happen. Mandation could perhaps come in the form of some sort of tax incentive or disincentive to act or not act according to the government's desires. I think that's entirely possible that if it doesn't happen fast enough and well enough, the government will start creating incentives or penalties through the tax system to make the pension schemes do what they want them to do without ever removing or obstructing trustees and IGC's freedom to invest as they see fit for their members. So I think that's where we're going next. But I ask the question, well, what does good even look like in this context? So if you look at the value for money framework, you've got 8 asset classes, including private equity, private debt, and infrastructure. Those are pretty broad brushes. And so the government talks a lot. They produced a separate paper recently on pension fund investment in the UK economy. And that again talks about private equity and private debt and about infrastructure. Is that granular enough? So I guess is my question. So that's what the VFM framework will measure. But does that deliver the outcomes the government's looking for? Because after all, in theory, private equity could be overseas private equity. It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be investment into the UK economy. And this is what I'm not sure about with this is, what does the pull factor look like in all of this? How does the government clear the runway to create a context where the startups, the growth businesses, the innovators can attract the investment capital from the pension schemes? Because it's all very well the government trying to push the pension scheme money down to street level to where it's going to stimulate the economy. But I think a big part of it has to be about creating a context where the investment targets are quite simply attractive recipients of that capital, and it is as easy as possible for them to seek that investment. And this is not something I'm close to, so I can't really comment further on that. But it feels like I think we need to hear a bit more on that side of things, and then clearly they're going to drive through the consolidation agenda, but they don't yet appear to have defined. They seem uncertain. You look at the consultation paper, whether it's at scheme level or default fund level that they want the big is beautiful to occur. So does this mean we still have as many pension schemes as exist today, but they're all investing in the same small number of default funds? Or does that mean we actually end up with fewer pension schemes? And the DWP seems uncertain what the answer to that question is. And so that says to me that none of this is going to happen quickly. And they've set a target date of 2030, which is pretty cautious. That also then begs the question, well, how much of this is actually going to deliver for this government? And, you can take the view that this government is being altruistic and doing what is right for the UK and the UK economy, and taking a long-term strategic view of how it can reform the pension landscape. I'm willing to bet they would quite like to put themselves in a position where they can reap the rewards for some of those reforms in time for the next general election. and currently it looks like that won't be the case. So I think it feels like none of this is going to happen quickly, given they still don't even know what they think good looks like. I was also intrigued to see that they had put the question of differential scheme pricing into the consultation paper. That was something I'd been banging on about with the DWP, the fact that even if you consolidate down the number of pension schemes, it's not uncommon for pension providers to offer differential pricing depending on the relative attractiveness of different employers and different individual pension schemes. So, a chip shop owner will not get such an attractive deal from a master trust as would, say, Goldman Sachs, because of the average salary and so on. I'm talking about a Goldman Sachs purely as a potential client in that context. I appreciate that's probably a poor example, but you know what I mean. So our wealthy. So it's interesting the DWP are, at least in Treasury, are at least interested in the question of should we funnel pension providers down to fewer or even indeed just one set of charges for their entire book of business. But again, they don't know the answer to this question. This is a consultation. They're going to run the consultation through till mid-January, and then they'll go away and think about it. And then they'll probably have a further consultation on some of the more refined detail of it. This is all going to take some time. I was also really interested that they highlighted the role of employers and employee benefit consultants in the consultation paper. And I think it's reasonable to say, and I'm open to discussion around all of this, that the rebroking market for workplace pensions is not particularly active. So once an employer has selected a workplace pension scheme, typically they'll fight quite hard not to have to go and do that work again. They've selected a scheme and they're happy with it. So the DWP and the Treasury are clearly not entirely enthusiastic about this and want there to be more activity in this space. Do we make this a duty on the employer? Well, that means more regulation. All this activity potentially is good news for the employee benefit consultants who will be paid by employers to help them navigate their way through this challenge. I would like to see a world where eventually that value for money data is condensed and recycled and published out into the outside world in a format that allows employers as much as possible to bypass the need for an employee benefit consultant if they don't want one. They can select a scheme, make an informed decision on what good looks like, and then change it at will based on a coherent set of metrics of what a good pension scheme looks like. But again, it feels like we're quite a long way off that. And if anything, this consultation paper in the short term is likely to lead to more work for the employee benefit consultants rather than less, which is great news if you're an EBC, but is also going to add some costs to the system. I'm just looking at Peter's point there about granularity. Will that result in schemes buy into existing infrastructure investments? Yeah.
Yeah, if I could just amplify that.
Go on, Peter. Thank you.
All that would happen is if they encourage infrastructure, pension schemes will go and look for infrastructure investments to put into their portfolio, and then that will create a seller's market for those existing investments and pushing up the price and down the returns. And that won't achieve the government's aim of expanding the British economy.
Yeah, absolutely agree with that. I think there's real risk of unintended consequences here, and how you do this in a way that actually genuinely results in an expanding economy is quite a difficult needle to thread, I think. I mean, crudely, and again, every time I have a conversation with a policymaker about this, they just go, oh, well, look at the Maple 8, look at the Canadians, look at the Australians, they're doing it. They invest much more in their domestic markets, and they come over here and buy our assets, these foreigners. Why can't our pension schemes do that? And you're like, well, yeah, okay, but it's not simple. So if you start mandating it, as you say, Peter, I think it can have unintended consequences. I do think if you end up with fewer bigger pension schemes, they've sort of drawn a line at around 25 billion. If you've got that kind of pool of capital, you are more likely to be able to go out and seek these investments. The consultation, yeah, Peter, please.
Sorry about that. Yes, the point there is that we've invested in a small scale in a pooled infrastructure fund, Canadian pooled infrastructure fund. We found that the Canadian pension schemes actually invest in multiple funds. They don't use their value of scale to invest, say, 25 billion in one particular fund. They spread it out over a number of investment managers. And so they may end up with X percent of Thames Water, but in fact that investment is spread over 6 or 7 investment managers who have all also chosen Thames Water. So I think this scale thing is a bit misleading on that.
So just to stay with that, because you clearly got some experience with this, Peter, so I appreciate your comments on this. Just to challenge on it, are you saying even if they drive this consolidation, as appears inevitable now, so you've got fewer master trusts, you've got fewer bigger GPP providers, the whole multi-employer end of the market has condensed, are you saying that might still not materially alter their investment strategies?
No, I was just talking about the Canadian
right. Okay.
experience as a comparator, if you like, and saying that's what they're achieving. In fact, what they do is they set the goals for their investment managers and then mandate individual investment managers against those goals. Now, the fact is that the schemes end up with slightly different portfolios with different investment managers, but because they're setting the goals, you tend to come back to the same investments managers. So you don't really get much benefit from the combination, if you like, on the investment side of things in the Canadian model. Yes, I was quite surprised. We went into this fund and then discovered they were talking about the Thames Water as a risk factor by the investment manager, but it wasn't actually in our portfolio, which was much to our relief. But their Canadian Ontario Teachers Pension Scheme, for the sake of argument, was invested in the portfolio that we are invested in, and they obviously are one of the biggest shareholders in Thames Water as it stands at the moment. So you end up not creating the new investment opportunities that people are trying to achieve. So it's just a minor point, and I don't want to labour it too much, but I think sometimes the experience is slightly different from what it's assumed to be.
Well, yes, I don't think that's going to stop them, because they're like a dog with a bone with this. And thank you, Peter. So I think whether it delivers the outcomes they seek or not, they're going to do this, I think, is where we're at right now. And as I alluded to earlier on, there seems to be political consensus that they're going to do this. The challenge of how they define it and drive it and deliver the outcomes they want still remains unresolved. So I was interested, talking to two different policy wonks, one from the DWP and one from the Treasury. We got onto the subject of size and innovation. And I think there's a real concern here for some of the smaller pension providers, particularly some of the smaller master trusts who are newer to the marketplace. You know, when the government says, well, you've 25 billion or you're out, okay. How are you going to define that? How are you going to police that? I mean, never mind whether that then delivers the outcomes you're looking for. If you're looking to sort of effectively set a minimum scheme size, and we're not clear whether it's a default fund or schemes level yet, because they haven't worked that bit out. But either way, some of the smaller and newer providers in the marketplace are probably going to feel a little uncomfortable about that. So they quite reasonably say, well, look, you need some innovation. You need to be able to challenge the marketplace. And I was interested to hear two different policy wonks both use exactly the same line to me. It's almost like they've been talking to each other when they said, well, yeah, but innovation doesn't just mean having a fancy app. right? So as far as the government is concerned, certainly as far as the civil service are concerned, innovation and disruption and creativity has to exist at a higher level than simply coming up with some clever app for engaging your members with. It's got to be more substantive and meaningful than that. Now, okay, that's interesting to note. I mean, bear in mind that one of the three metrics for the value, one of the three pillars of the value for money framework is member engagement. So, your counter argument to that is, well, in that context, having a good app actually is quite important as part of the value for money framework. But that's not what the government's looking for, certainly not what the civil servants were looking for. And that comes back to the question of, well, do you really actually care about this strategy of consolidating this fragmented UK pension market into fewer, bigger, better run pension schemes for the good of all? Or do you just want that productive finance investment? Is that really what you're really caring about in all of this? So there are hundreds, if not thousands, of smaller workplace pensions sub 100k. The EBCs are not able to advise. Sorting these will bring value for money to members involved, but won't generate significant assets to invest in the UK. Well, Bobby, I agree with you, and I think getting that consolidation of itself would be a good thing. For all that we've created an auto-enrollment framework that requires each employer to make an active choice about where that particular employees get to save for their retirement, I would argue that across vast swathes of the UK workforce, those individuals' needs are relatively homogenous. They do not all need a carefully crafted bespoke pension arrangement. If you look across the big GPPs and master trusts, there are differences between them, but the one will do as well as the other, largely. I appreciate there are differences in investment return, and I may be doing some participants on this call a disservice. But again, hopefully value for money framework will drive the investment proposition up towards to cluster around the better outcomes that some have already managed to deliver in contrast to others. So I agree with you, the EBCs are not going to get involved in all of those. And even if you sort it out, it's not going to generate significant assets to invest in the UK. I would argue that of itself, consolidating the fragmented workplace pension market would be a good thing. It's just a mess. And whether you're talking about dashboards or anything else that you're trying to do in the marketplace, it's a hell of a lot easier if you've consolidated the sector in. Agree, I'm trying to help such a scheme at the moment, having to be innovative with fees and having to find a similar innovative lawyer. Okay, fair enough. I'm also not sure where CDC fits into all of this. And I claim no great expertise in the CDC market. I've talked to a few people who do profess to be experts, and there are enthusiastic advocates for CDC. I sat in on a PPI session on it recently, which left me at the end feeling less. So last time I spoke to Adrian Balding, I came away from the conversation thinking, oh yeah, CDC is a done deal now. It's all going to happen, and it's going to happen quite soon. I came away from that PPI session thinking, I'm a lot less convinced now. It looks like there's still a bit of a problem. And when you dig into the Royal Mail model, it involves a huge cross-subsidy towards the older members of the scheme. And when you look at the multi-employer models, don't you think we might get a damn sight further and faster if we consolidated the regulators and Quanga? Oh, Padre, see, like it's red rag to a bull, that is. So, a yes. Sorry, I'm just going to pick up that point. I would love to see a restructuring of the FCA and TPR for starters. I struggle to understand why we continue to have two different regulatory models for DC pensions. If you're gonna make a strategic consolidation of the sector, you definitely need to do that with the regulators as well. And I appreciate there are lots of vested interests pushing against that. To me, it's a no-brainer. I think. I'd argue that goes beyond simply the financial services sector. There are a lot of quangos we should probably do something about, as long as they don't just give it to the FCA. Well, yes. So I think we're up for a separate discussion about how it should be done. I would start from, and again, from talking to people within the DWP. Do you want to comment on that, Padraig? I noticed you switched your microphone on. Do you want to come in there?
Oh, apologies. I didn't know the microphone was on. I have turned it off more than once. It keeps switching itself back on.
I think maybe it's trying to give you a hint. You just need to jump into this conversation.
Maybe, or it's just this bloody Microsoft system. What was the point I want to make? Yeah, I fail to understand why they seem to want to reinvent the wheel when there is a single point of failure, multiple point of failure, which is the regulatory oversight. It's failed for 25 years. It hasn't got any better. It isn't going to get any better with consolidation. So they might not just grab that nettle and put in place something more like the Australian regulator that's got muscles and teeth and is prepared to use them, rather than the ones we've got. One that doesn't want to regulate, except unless it wants to smack people's legs retrospectively about stuff they didn't provide adequate guidance over, or TPR, which just seems to be engorging itself and spending more and more on doing. I'm not entirely sure what, but I just, if they're going to if it's going to be root and branch, let's look at the regulation as well, because it's substandard and simply not fit for purpose.
I agree. And I think you can apply that argument across the whole of government. And I think it's really interesting, going off at a tangent for a moment, that Keir Starmer talked in the last few days about setting targets for the NHS. Okay, you can have targets or you can have reform, right? It's really difficult to do both at the same time, because once you introduce targets, everyone will start trying to hit those targets. If they're trying to hit the targets, it's really hard to do reform as you go along. And I feel like this government has an opportunity to, we know about the financial services sector, we know about the pension sector, we can see some of the dysfunctions in the regulatory framework there. Every time I take a peek at another sector of the economy, I see the same story. I think there is a vast amount of restructuring and reform that could be done. Obviously, actually doing it is a massive undertaking and is really difficult, and none of it is simple. And I get that. I would love to see the government being bold on all of that. And again, coming back to the comments I made about the opposition at the beginning of this conversation, I think part of their offering, as they work out what their relevance is and what their proposition is for the electorate going into the next general election, will be about simplifying and stripping down government and getting rid of some of those quangos and arm's length bodies and making them all deliver more efficiently. And they've already been citing the example of the Lower Thames crossing as a classic example of planning gone out of control. I want to pick up on Philip's point there about an industry body that focuses on retirement. In direct contradiction to the comments I've literally just made, I think there is an argument for some sort of Office for Pension Responsibility or Long-Term Pensions Commission, or some kind of standing advisory body that sits alongside but outside government to steer the decision making. I know there was a lot of support across the industry for some kind of longer term strategic thinking on pensions. Look, I'm MAPS. I'm going to meet with Oliver Morley later this week, so I don't want to do him a disservice. I'm struggling to understand what the point of MAPS is now, and I was going to come on in this call to talk about engagement in a wee while, so I'll just park that thought for now and ask Philip what his thoughts are, since he's got his hand up.
Yeah. So thanks, Wanda. And Peter's come up with a point about annuities and DB pensions under different regimes. It's just like my main thrust is just like people forget that retirement isn't just about pensions. We always refer to equity release earlier on, and there isn't really institutions or bodies that are given the full look at retirement. Being very provocative here, just like, so PLSA is basically losing members because either they're going to buy out or they are going to a master trust. So they just need to have a broader church. I think PMI is getting a bit closer to it because they've got their lifetime savings initiative with their driving. So they're getting towards that. but there isn't really kind of an industry voice that embraces sort of the holistically around retirement. And again, sort of test me to this. And Tom, I was provocative about equity release earlier on, because equity release itself, even within the FCA, sits under two regulatory regimes. Well, so, yeah, that's my little pedestal.
But look, it's all really siloed, and we might come back to that as this call progresses. And I think finding a bit of joined upness across the industry, across government, I mean, retirement provision is such a massive undertaking and touches on so many areas of the economy that I think you need to be able to take a step back and do a bit of strategic thinking, even though I get the fact that being in government and doing stuff is really, really hard and really difficult to make anything shift. So I know Henry's on the call, but it's probably not likely to make an active contribution. I want to come back to that point I made around CDC, because it continues to be a really big part of DWP's thinking, right? They really, really want CDC to be the right answer. They really, really want it to deliver. So if there's anybody in this call who can just briefly chip in and say, yep, I can see how CDC is going to deliver and is going to be part of the answer, do please speak up, because I'm still struggling to see where it comes from. Peter, is that a new hand you've put up, or is that an old hand that you've just left dangling in the air?
No, it's a new hand, because I have some experience of discussing CDC with employers. And today there's a publication, I think, by Hymans Robertson, that said when they surveyed employers, 40% of employers were interested in changing to a CDC scheme. So that's much higher than they expected. And indeed, the employers which I'm involved with, which are generally not-for-profit organisations and close to civil service or academia, are finding that, in fact, the pension promise offered by civil service or academia, public bodies, is in fact a detriment to their recruitment, and therefore they are looking to provide a more secure pension promise for their prospective employees, and CDC seems to be a potential solution to that, without them having to take on the obligations of scheme sponsorship themselves.
That makes sense, and I can see how they might be attracted to it. I guess whether they are still attracted to it once they've understood the granularity, back to that word again, about how it operates, and whether you need to create sections, and how the indexation will work, and whether it will actually deliver for their members or not. I mean, from what I understand, you get lost in the weeds, and what sounds like a great idea in principle actually seems to be proving quite difficult to deliver. Yeah, go on, Peter.
Yeah, I think that's the problem with the regulation. That the CDC, when it was first established, and I had some background in that, that it was seen as a DB pension, as close to a DB pension as you could get. So it was exactly the same thing. So the differential age benefits were disregarded, because you got it as a, in fact, as you know, it tends to favour older employees, that DB pension. But that was seen as part of the employment characteristic, and if you move companies, then you lost out effectively. But that was seen as actually an encouragement. So that granularity is being forced on by trying to put what is effectively a DB model into a DC environment, and I think that may be some of the things that come out as the regulations develop. I understand at the moment one of the biggest problems they're having to consider is how to value transfers in, and that sort of thing. So if they're moving from a DC to a CDC arrangement, and this sort of thing. So that inequalities between employees, but those are those are mechanisms rather than the principle of the thing, and the principle is looked at favourably. So I think we might find that there'll be different. Yes, there might be different schemes developed in different ways, but certainly there is quite a lot of interest. I mean, Church of England is well known as being proposed, and once you have one or other, then you have got the opportunity to transfer from CDC to CDC. That be possibility, and also it may also be able to encompass self-employed such like due course. Case there. So provided they pay in the contributions, there's no reason why they cannot be a participant in the scheme. So there is some momentum there, which is being explored by a couple of providers, potential providers.
Well, it's good to hear. I look forward to hearing or seeing progress on that front in due course. As I said,
in due course, it's going to be at least 2026.
Thank you. I'm conscious of time. I want to move on to the question of adequacy. I think that's a really important question in all of this. And I want to highlight a couple of things that have just popped up recently. One is the 2017 recommendations to really simple, small modifications to the existing auto-enrollment framework, change the qualifying age, change the definition of qualifying earnings. Everybody agreed on it. It's been legislated for. It still hasn't happened. I'm being told now that actually that has effectively been lost, and it's going to get baked into whatever happens next on adequacy. So, you know, any idea that we might do the 2017 reforms first, because that's already been legislated for and everyone agrees on it and it's a done deal, we'll do that. And then in addition, we'll do this second phase of the pensions review and we'll look at adequacy more broadly. That's not how it's going to play out. Effectively, 2017 has become part of phase 2 of the pensions review. So we haven't even managed to get that over the line. Effectively, it's been kicked down the road so far that it's been absorbed into the next round of review. And you come back to the context of the increase in national insurance rates, the minimum wage, the economic climate. My comments at the beginning of this call about, you know, Rachel Reeves is still having to do a bit of firefighting in terms of how her budget has landed. In that context, going out to employers in the new year and saying, oh, by the way, we'd like you to put a bit more money into your employees' pensions, or hey, employees, we'd like you to put a bit more money into your pensions when your energy bills have just gone up again in spite of Ed Miliband's promises to the contrary. You know, this is not going to be easy. And my worry is that any modification to the defaults that result in people, as a matter of course, putting more money into a pension is politically going to be pretty toxic. And therefore might, even if they manage to come up with a framework solution, it might get kicked down to the other side of the general election, just to kind of neutralize the impact of it. It's also become clear from looking at work by the IFS and the like that simply going to 12% is not the right answer. You need at this point to do something a little bit more, again, that word granular. Lower earners, particularly if you do the 2017 reforms, lower earners probably shouldn't be putting any more money into their pensions. Very highest earners, likewise. The people broadly on earnings of between, say, 40 or 50,000 and 100,000 a year, quite a big slice of the population these days, they're the ones more than any who are undersaving. They're the ones who almost certainly should be putting more than the default 8% in. So how do we address that? Do we do a more complex default landscape where the amount you put in is to some extent dependent on your level of income, for example, which puts more complexity on the shoulders of the employers and the payroll system, but produces more targeted results? Or do you just stick with a simple broad brush and say, I'll tell you what, we'll just gently turn the dial up to 9% and 10% and 11% and whatever? And if you're not going to do those things, to what extent can you rely on engagement and people making choices to do more. And my mates over at Hargreaves Lansdown have done some good work around employer matching contributions and how that can drive up voluntary participation, higher take up of pensions. But that's Hargreaves Lansdown's target market. It's not the mass market, so it's going to be difficult to deliver. And that kind of work was based on getting the employer to say, well, if you put in an extra 1%, I'll put in an extra 2%. And back to my comment about national insurance rates, and it's a difficult moment to go and ask employers to do that kind of thing. But it feels like the need for engagement is just as strong as ever it was. Defaults are great, and where you can use defaults to solve problems, I think that is the best answer. But that doesn't solve everything. And when you look at Gen X in particular, and the older millennials, the people sort of into their 40s now and through into their 50s, we've got a real problem with that generation, many of whom are significantly under saving right now and are rapidly heading towards an impoverished retirement. So some tough decisions need to be made about how much they save and when they can afford to retire. And that definitely shouldn't come as a surprise to them when they get to their early 60s. So stimulating that conversation with them sooner rather than later is a critical imperative around this pension review, whatever you do on the defaults. And then you get onto the question of default decumulation. And I'm still not sure what a good default product looks like. I certainly wouldn't put someone into an annuity without their permission. I think Nest did some good work around a bit of cash and a bit of drawdown and sort of annuitization in later life. We've got Philip on this call. I remain a big fan of the work that Guide do in helping people make their own decisions around what their decumulation solution should be, and then potentially even facilitating that outcome for them. But Billy, we should talk. Okay. Sorry, I just realized you guys should go and get a room somewhere elsewhere. So you're having your own private conversation here. I'm not party to any of the working groups going on default decumulation, so I don't know what's getting cooked up between the DWP and the industry, and it may be everyone's going to unveil brilliant solutions somewhere in the new year that just mean we don't need to talk to any of the members and people will just get conveyor belted into a comfortable retirement, making the best use of their assets. But I think that's unlikely. And to the earlier point that was raised around equity release, for a lot of people, that is going to have to play a role in the equation. And the point about FCA regulation is very siloed around all of this. So all of this is a problem. I am waiting with bated breath to see the FCA targeted support consultation paper that is due out imminently, sometime in the next weeks ahead. Well, yeah, look, Chris, on that point about LISA, and we haven't even talked about auto-enrollment for the self-employed. Peter briefly touched on it, I think, but if I were going to auto-enroll a self-employed basic rate taxpayer, I'd auto-enroll them into a lifetime ISA rather than into a pension. It makes much more sense for them. So there's issues around that. And again, without significant structural reform, we talked about Australia and how they use the tax office to help with the auto-enrollment process. Arguably, we should be doing something like that here in the UK. Do we just mandate that every self-employed person has to use an online platform and that then becomes the vehicle that also gets them auto-enrolled? Maybe you need to do that kind of thing. Well, anyway, Chris, look, you've turned your camera on. Do you want to come in on this point? What do you think?
Right. So, can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yeah. Yes, I've always thought, obviously, for the self-employed, it's a no-brainer because they don't have an employer contribution other than themselves. So that's double contributions. But generally for younger people, there has been quite a bit of talk recently about the fact that you can, of course, use a LISA for house purchase or for pensions. And of course, if you leave it for pensions, you can actually build up quite a handy tax-free sum, because there's no taxation, is there, when you draw it? But I think the flexibility to the two, I mean, the real conversation, I think, would be if you bumped up the auto enrollment contributions, but you could ask for your contributions and potentially your employer contributions up to the £4,000 limit to be transferred into a LISA. Has that debate taken place?
Not really, and I think arguably it should. and maybe given they're going to find it really difficult to simply demand more money as part of this adequacy review, maybe they should be thinking about those kind of questions when they kick off. I understand we're going to get a paper on this adequacy review imminently as well. I sincerely hope they think that broadly. I suspect perhaps they won't, but we'll see. I guess the fact they're kicking off the consultation means there is a vehicle, there's a channel of communication in there. So I feel like there's a huge amount still to be done. I'm constantly struck by 20 years post auto enrollment, post Turner. Yes, we made progress on participation rates, but we've still got a massive amount of work still to do to have a pension system that's fit for purpose. And I just want to conclude my thoughts on this by highlighting some of the big picture issues that I briefly alluded to earlier on. One is demographics, fertility rate down to 1.4 now. A mate joking, I mean, he was kind of joking, but I kind of agree with him. Look, we've got COP, what is it now? Now that's what I call COP29 going on at the moment. And, I would argue that's actually a distraction. You would be much better served having a COP on demographics and fertility rates than we would on climate change. Because to me, that's more of an existential threat over the next 100 years than climate change is. DWP has two big levers to pull on the state pension. One is the age at which you get it, and the other is the indexation rate. The indexation rate is clearly massively politically toxic and really difficult. That's why every party keeps repledging to the triple lock. But if you want to save money on the state pension because you've got demographic problems, changing the indexation rate is by far the most effective thing you can do. It's going to have to happen at some point, and the fact that we can't have that political conversation just makes life really difficult. It's another reason why I think a pensions commission wouldn't be a bad thing, because it would provide a government with air cover for those kind of conversations. But at the moment, we're looking at 67, with in theory going up to 68 on the state pension age. It's going to have to keep going up, and we're not having those difficult conversations at the moment. We're also not talking about the role housing plays. I mean, we've touched a bit on equity release. The other big part of that is the decline in home ownership over the next 20 years as people approach retirement. And mostly people arrive in retirement at the moment owning their own home. As we've discussed, they're not really making best use of that asset once they get there. But that home ownership, that declining home ownership, raises all kinds of problems for whether we should be auto-enrolling them now, given that they're not going to benefit from that auto-enrollment. So that's difficult. And we're not talking about social care funding either in the context of pension provision. Loads of councils and local authorities are on the verge of bankruptcy. There's an argument for council tax reform. But again, this one just keeps getting kicked down the road. And when we talk about pension reform, we don't talk about the pension reform in the context of housing or social care. And I don't see how you can have a meaningful conversation about what you're doing with the pension system without thinking about those systems as well. But it's just too difficult, so we don't. And I can't quite understand why politicians choose not to, but I think that's usually problematic as well. Anyway, look, we've got 5 minutes left. I'm going to stop talking now. Does anyone have any questions or comments that you've not yet raised, or should we just call it?
Tom, that's a great session. Obviously, there's a load of stuff to talk about there, but anybody got any questions, like to raise a hand, make a point? Billy, Mohsin, John, Phil? Phil, last question to you then, Philip of Guide. How would that work then? Your comment regarding what did you say, Phil? You said industry body that focused on retirement. Philip from Guide. What would that look like then? Are you saying another body? So get rid of FCA and TPR and create another body?
As I said, no, it wasn't from a regulatory perspective. It was from an industry voice. That's what I was driving at. Padraig had already made the point about from the regulatory side. I was chipping in with the industry voice. I think some of the institutions we got are outdated, and they are driven by they're not driven the right way. Sorry, it's a very blunt way of saying it. You've got things like Tizer kind of like add pensions onto what they're doing. I've already said PLSA is just in decline. The only one that I see at the moment is PMI, which is actually making strides into broader savings.
I mean, interestingly, Philip, we've also got a new platform trade body
yeah.
getting set up. You know, because there's always room for another trade body, right?
Yeah, and I'm sorry, going to be very, very controversial. So some of these bodies were set up in older regimes, and to some extent they are perpetuating older models and trying to protect the status quo. That's my concern.
Well, yeah, I mean, their primary objective generally is, you know, protecting the business model of the existing business models of their members.
Right, exactly. As I say, out of all those that are out there, PMI is the only one that I think is showing a little bit of innovation. There, Steve, is that right?
That sounds lovely. Lovely.
I'll defer to others with regard to the regulators. I won't make.
Yeah. As a regulated business.
Other than what I just said earlier on, is that when it comes to equity release, even the FCA is divided internally.
Yeah, that's fair comment. Okay, well, on that note, Tom, a great session, part deux. Thank you very much indeed. Really enjoyed that. We covered a lot of issues and wide-ranging points of view, and we really virtual claps and actual claps, please, for Tom for his time this morning, his input. That was really, really good. The video will be up later on this afternoon, plus the podcast. So that's really, really good. Again, as we mentioned at the very beginning of this, we wish Henry Tapper all the best for a speedy recovery. And if anybody wants an update, then please contact me directly and I'll give you some news. But there's not really a lot to say. But if anybody is interested in Henry's situation, then please come to me direct, and I'm very happy to take an email there. Next week, I think we've got John Quinlivan, JQ, talking about DB liabilities, which is something he's been working on for many years. So a really good pre-Christmas theme, DB liabilities. So that should get you all in the festive mood. And as usual, we pray for peace in the East, peace in the Middle East. But thanks for your time today. Really enjoyed that session, Tom. Thank you so much. And yeah, have a safe day, have a safe week. And if you ride a bike, wear a helmet. Last words. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Enjoy your week. Cheers. All right.
Bye.
Bye.